Right now, we're going to jump into unmanned vehicles, drones. You can call them anything you want, UAS, UAV. Some people call them toys, but we're going to treat them as aircraft. And we got a great panel for you. Let me introduce the various members. Rich Hanson currently serves as the president and CEO of the Academy of Model Aeronautics and headquartered in Muncie, Indiana. He previously served as AMA's Government and Regulatory Affairs Director. Good news for us, Rich is a high-time, lifelong helicopter pilot, military and civilian. Fine American, yes. Joe Morra. Joe is the director of the Federal Aviation's Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Office Safety and Integration Division. This division is an enterprise-wide conduit for UAS initiatives, serving as a liaison and facilitator for safety, operational standards, special programs, and security initiatives between responsible organizations both within the FAA and external stakeholders. Before joining the UAS Integration Office, Joe was a General Aviation Operations Inspector up at the Teterboro FSDO in New Jersey. Brendan Schulman, Vice President of Policy and Legal Affairs at DJI, which is the world's leading civilian drone manufacturer. Brendan's responsible for setting and representing DJI's global strategy relating to public policy and advocating for reasonable and balanced regulatory outcome for drone operators around the globe. Next is Larry Williams, and Larry helps lead market expansion for Zipline International, a Silicon Valley-based logistics company that designs, manufactures, and operates the world's first commercial drone-based delivery service. In October 2016, Zipline began a partnership with the country of Rwanda to put all of Rwanda's 11 million citizens within 15 to 30-minute delivery of any essential medical product. In 2019, the company will be expanding to numerous countries, including Ghana and the United States. And prior to Zipline, Larry assisted serial entrepreneur Elon Musk in growing the space exploration technology SpaceX into the leading provider of space launch services. And our final panel member is Brian Wynne. Brian is President and CEO of the Association of Unmanned Vehicle Systems International. And Brian just coming off a show last week out in Chicago, which I thought was pretty exciting. And his organization is dedicated to the advancement of unmanned systems and robotics. AUVSI represents corporations, professionals from more than 60 countries involved in business and government and who work in the defense, civil, and commercial markets. Brian is an influential unmanned system industry thought leader. In 2017, he was appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Transportation to a 3-year term on the Federal Aviation Administration's Management Advisory Council. Additionally, Brian's a member of the FAA's Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team, which is comprised of stakeholders from government and the aviation industry, and gather and analyze data to enhance UAS safety. And I think we have probably one of the best unmanned vehicle panels that I've seen in a while. So it should be interesting presentations, conversations, and even more interesting having the conversations and questions from the audience. So with that, you want to start off for us?
Not sure which mics works better, so I'll try them both. Chris, I had the slide deck on a thumb drive. Do you want to try and load that up or no? I did put together a slide deck for today. It's probably way long for this presentation, so I'll go ahead and get started. But you know, I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to be with you guys today and to attend this particular event. In 1969, the state of Arizona commissioned a study called the AIM study. and they contracted with Arizona Helicopters, the University of Arizona, and the State Highway Patrol to test whether or not helicopters could be used for air medical evacuation in remote parts of the state, keying off of the successes that we saw in the Korean War and in the Vietnam War. And that was a 2-year study that was overwhelmingly successful, as you might imagine. In 1972, the state legislature actually passed emergency medical services legislation that kicked off the first air rescue operation in the state of Arizona. And together with, I think, the state of Maryland, it became one of the first statewide public safety EMS operations in the country. And I was fortunate to be one of the 7 pilots that was chosen to start that operation. And I spent 26 years flying EMS operations for the state of Arizona. So I feel very much akin to the operators that are out here today. But you know, that's not really where my love of aviation started. My love of aviation started when I was just a kid, 6 years old. My dad, who was that's a different PowerPoint. Sorry. But, you have to go into a folder called HEI conference. And then it's that PowerPoint. That hasn't come up yet. That's it. What drives it anyhow? Do we just have to push this? We might have to click on enable. It's not going to go, huh? Well, if it won't. Well, anyhow, as I was starting to say, is my love for aviation actually started out when I was just a little kid. My parents gave me Cox 049 U-control plastic models as a kid. And if any of you ever tried to start an 049 engine in your youth, you know there's a real technique to just doing that, and then to even fly one of these aircraft creates a lot more skill than 2 8 and 6-year-old kids have got. But I later learned that if you actually build a model airplane with balsa and tissue, you could actually build something that truly flies. And that led me into a lifelong hobby of flying model airplanes. But more importantly, it led me into high school when I joined the Civil Air Patrol, and that gave me my first pilot's license at the age of 18, and I entered into the Army in the warrant officer training program for helicopter pilot. And that really kicked off my career. So I always attribute model aircraft to spurring that interest into full-scale aviation. And we find that true throughout many people in the industry. Probably the most prominent one I can point out today, because this year, as you know, we'll be celebrating the 50th year anniversary of the moon landing. And Neil Armstrong's, will that go forward?
No, go ahead, we'll get it.
Okay. Neil Armstrong's stepping onto the moon for the first time. And very few people probably know that he was an AMA member. His time spent at Purdue University was in an AMA club, a club of aerospace students that.
That's right.
Yep.
And just call it the space mark for the next one. Or up.
Okay, thank you. That's my dad, by the way. He was a B-17 pilot. AMA was founded in 1936. We're headquartered in Muncie, Indiana. Over 200,000 members, and the point of this that really strikes home to me is that over 50,000 of our members are under the age of 19. 2,400 clubs, 2,000 affiliated flying sites around the country. And we like to say that maybe the first modeler that we're aware of was Leonardo da Vinci. In the 15th century, a lot of his drawings depicted aeromodeling or aviation vehicles. And although many of those, if any of those actually were ever built, we have had modelers that have since taken his drawings and scaled those into prototypes and found that many of those devices actually took flight. The first model airplane, powered model airplane, was sort of a rudimentary rotorcraft device. It had two rotors with a rubber band in between. And that started flying back in the 19th century, but the Wright brothers used that or got introduced to that as kids. And they actually started using model airplanes to prove the wing designs of their first manned glider. And we found that much of aviation actually has its roots in model aviation. When the Endeavour was flown across the country for its last flight before it was put on display out in California, what a lot of people don't know is that aircraft, in the cockpit of the Endeavour, is a model of a shuttle aircraft that was actually used to prove the piggyback transport system that was used for the 747. I don't know if this will play. Oh, I'll skip it. It was just a short video on that. So where does that take us today? As I said, that thousands of aviation professionals got their starts in model aviation. And we've always seen model aircraft as one of the stepping stones into the aerospace industry. And many of the segments of that industry today are concerned about where the next generation of aerospace workers, pilots, engineers are going to come from. This was an article that came out in WebFlash a few years ago, or a couple years ago, but we're seeing this routinely, as I said, both in the military and in the commercial sector, of concern about the lack of enthusiasm, if you will, in the younger generation into the aviation professions. Some of the people that have come up through the ranks in model aviation are people like Sean Tucker, Hoot Gibson, Brad Lang. I don't know if you guys are familiar with a comedian named Jeff Dunham, but he's actually an AME member as well. And as I mentioned earlier, I got ahead of my slides a little bit, most notably was Neil Armstrong, who in his days at Purdue actually was designing and proving aerospace designs and competing in model aviation events. Videos don't want to play. What AMA is trying to do at this point is we have a full educational staff that is working on youth programs to bring them into the aviation arena through STEM curriculums, through competition, through fun events, anything that will spur their interest, get them off of the video games, and get them out flying model airplanes. We've developed model aviation student clubs at both the university and high school levels and the community college levels. We have a UAS for STEM competition where teams compete regionally and nationally for the ability to program and perform missions using UAS aircraft. There's an event, a brand new event that's taken on, how many of you are familiar with Triple Tree Aerodrome down in South Carolina? Very wonderful place if you're an aviation enthusiast. They put on all kinds of events. We have a big event coming up called Joe Null Week in just a couple of weeks. But in June, they have a program for young aviators where EAA, AOPA, and AMA sponsor this and bring in youth and give them the whole gamut of exposure to aviation, both full-scale and model aviation. We have a summer camp that's held right at AMA headquarters in Muncie, Indiana, where 40 to 50 kids come every year to participate in model aviation events. I hope this plays. Yeah. I want that video there to play, but, well, there's a great video there. I really want you to see that it shows the impressions that are given to our youth in model aviation and spurring them on into this industry. But that's what I see as the biggest challenge right now, is keeping this new generation involved. I know that the regulatory process that we go through to integrate the UAS aircraft into the aviation environment is a very necessary process, but that process is really having a bit of a chilling effect on the traditional model aircraft community as well as the youth that are traditionally involved in that community. So I hope that that's one issue that we keep in mind as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, your choice, if you'd like to use the podium or there, whatever works. Here you go.
Thank you. Okay, so once again, I'm Joe Morra from the FAA, the UAS Integration Office, and as Matt said, there's a great panel assembled here, so I will keep my comments fairly brief here because you probably don't want to hear from the regulator, you want to hear from industry and some of the associations we've got up here, some good stuff. So we do have one slide that I normally put as a backdrop, which is that, we got it. So over the last few years, we've seen, I'm starting in the top left-hand corner, we've seen enormous progress in enabling safe operations. And the fundamental key with this is enabling a safety culture. So it's not only at the industry level, at the association level, it's also within the FAA. So some of the progress that we've actually seen, we've got some proposed rules out there, operations over people, operations at night, registration, a marking rule that's out there finally, and we've got upcoming rules like remote ID. I really just mention these things, not to go into a lot of detail, but if you have questions at the end that we can bounce off of the different panel members, I'd be happy to have those. But some of the progress we've seen is if you look in the agricultural realm, for example, you've got companies like Drone Seed that are actually out there with agricultural operator certificates right now, Part 137, that are operating multiple aircraft at one time, conducting operations. And this actually started all the way back with Yamaha and some others through exemptions. So once again, enabling a safety culture means taking incremental steps towards approving safe operations. I'll go to the next part here, that we've really looked at our risk management also, because if you want to certificate a new helicopter or an airline, there's ways to do that in the FAA, but just because you get a type certification on your aircraft doesn't mean that you can rely on that technology to go into particular airspace or to operate as an airline. You still need other things. The aircraft has its component, the airspace has its component of how you get access to that airspace, and then the operation has that same component. So I'm actually going to skip across and go to the wing example in the bottom left-hand corner. So last month, through the Integration Pilot Program, we've actually certificated the first air carrier. And I know you'll hear from Larry too, that a lot of these operations of conducting safe operations is just as much of an exercise for the FAA to go through our processes and ensure that those things can be done safely, which we have. So for example, that air carrier had to petition for exemption to a number of rules that wouldn't normally fit a unmanned aircraft system. They wanted to address all three of those circles at the same time. Without a type certificated aircraft yet, how do you ensure that the safety in those other circles compensates for that? Well, they're in a very limited area in Blacksburg, Virginia right now. They have an air carrier certificate, a Part 135 air carrier certificate. And they've been issued the exemption to go along with that. So they have a lot of mitigations in the operator circle. And they're working towards type certification. So this all goes back to what the legislation is reinforcing with us too. They're reinforcing that we can exercise our existing rules and leverage those to enable safe operations. Once again, if you start with, we didn't have a registration rule until a few years back. Now we have over 1 million model aircraft registrants and over 300,000 commercial registrants. We had to work towards automating that. So you went from a paper process that you're all probably familiar with to a 7.5-minute process that includes swiping your credit card in a cell phone app. How do you deal with airspace access on a bigger scale? That's what the low altitude authorization notification capability is. That's a way of, instead of talking to a controller, how can you safely integrate UAS into airspace and get the permission to do that? So that's what we're working towards with Lance. A lot of these things are mirrored in the legislation, that it's reinforcement that we need to keep moving down this road. Working with organizations like AUVSI, working with the Unmanned Aircraft Safety Team, we're doing a lot of different things to multiply the force and enable the ability for, I don't like getting asked the question of what is the FAA doing to improve safety around drones. By having 100,000 remote pilots out there that are operating safely, they're getting the message across that there is a way, there are regulations to do this, there are safe ways to actually be operating. So we're happy to say that we're showing progress. We've got a long way to go, but I think with all the partnerships up here and with HAI, we're willing to work with you together. And like I said, I'm going to yield my time back to the rest of the panel members at this point. So thank you. Thank you.
I think I'm going to stay here, be a little more casual. So again, I'm Brendan Schulman from DJI. We're the world's leading manufacturer of consumer and professional drones. If you've seen a drone out there in the wild being used for everything from cinematography to life-saving applications in search and rescue, law enforcement, public safety, it's probably ours. Outside analysts estimate we have about 75, maybe 80% of the market of that category of small UAS. And really that gives us a privileged position to make a difference to operational safety. When we develop and implement a safety feature, even in the absence or before Joe can get the regulations done, and it does take a time to get formal regulations done, we think we can do a lot and have done a lot to contribute to a safe operating environment. Just to give you examples, for those of you not familiar with our technology, we have a whole list of features we've developed over the past few years that I do believe have made a difference to operational safety. And probably the primary one is geofencing. Geofencing is the use of the GPS receiver on board the drone. So each of our major drone products has a GPS receiver, just like your phone or your car navigation system or your helicopter, I'm sure. So the drone knows where it is in the world. And we have pre-programmed locations in the drone, primarily airports, but also other types of facilities, to automatically prevent the drone from either entering that airspace above the facility or taking off within it if our customer is at an airport or too close to it with the drone and tries to fly. We've upgraded that system twice in the past 4 years. So we started off with circles, sort of inspired by the FAA legislation in 2012 that said notify the airport within 5 miles. We said, okay, it makes sense to draw a circle, a 5-mile circle around an airport and do something in that area. We've since enhanced the system. So a couple years ago, the geofencing added prisons, nuclear power plants, and probably most important to this community, FATFRs. So if you're in a wildfire scenario or an emergency or a disaster response, we have, for those of our drones that are connected to the network using a cellular phone connection on the ground control station, we can push out the TFR and automatically disable the drone from taking off or flying in that TFR. Now, of course, we need to balance that automatic restriction with the ability to conduct life-saving beneficial applications. So with that restriction, we also have a rapid response unlocking team. If you are authorized to fly in the TFR or at the airport, which many people are, we can get that unlocked for you. If you're a public safety agency, we will give you 2 years of unlocking across your state or county or jurisdiction or nationally, depending on what kind of agency you are. So as we create a safety enhancement, we need to also account for the fact that people are using drones for great things, including saving lives. We've been tracking, just based on news reports, stories of drones like ours saving lives, rescuing people from peril, and we're up to now over 230 people who've been rescued from hazardous scenarios, missing people, flooding, fires, things like that. There was a mountain climber who was lost on the mountain with amazing footage. I don't know if you've seen that one. That's just counting the news reports. I'm sure there's at least twice as many that we don't see in the news. So we've got the geofencing, and we hope they're enabling beneficial applications by balancing the safety along with the innovation. Altitude limits. So if you take our drone out there and you try to fly as high as you want, it's going to automatically stop you. Obviously, that accounts for keeping the drone away from the higher altitude traffic where there's a lot more going on in the manned aircraft community. We also have return to home, automatic return to home. So if the battery is running low or the drone loses its radio link to the ground control system, the drone doesn't just drift away or run out of power and crash where it is. It will actually use GPS navigation to return back to its takeoff location and safely land itself. Knowledge testing. I know this is a key issue for the FAA over the coming months to create per statute, to create a mandatory knowledge test for the model aircraft, the recreational small UAS community. We already did that. So about a year and a half ago, we implemented in our software a multiple choice knowledge quiz, we called it, on the basic rules of safe operations. We wanted to make sure that from the very first moment when you open the box and you take out the drone and you fly it using a remote controller connected to your phone, that you are prompted with the rules of operation and you're showing to us, really to the technology, that you know and understand those rules before you take your first flights. Obstacle avoidance. So when the drone is either coming back on its own in that return to home scenario, or if it's just being piloted manually, once in a while, we know this from experience, people fly into things, usually trees. It's a non-event with respect to a drone, but we obviously want to protect against buildings that might experience drone crashes, vehicles, and of course people. So we've added optical sensors in some models on all 4 sides and top and bottom to provide an obstacle avoidance capability. So when the drone is getting too close to an obstacle during its flight, first it starts beeping, kind of like your backup sensor in your car when you're parking, and eventually will automatically stop the drone from colliding with that object when it's detected. And probably the most significant project I've been involved in the past couple of years is remote ID. We were on the Aviation Rulemaking Committee a couple summers ago to try to assist the FAA in understanding the technology pathways to achieving that. We're big supporters of getting that rule done, but we're, again, not waiting. So we've already implemented remote ID in all of our products as of about a year and a half ago. So when you fly our drone, you are broadcasting out, sort of like a transponder, your position information, heading, speed, altitude, and the location of the pilot who's flying the drone. So if you're a law enforcement officer or public safety or an airport operations or air traffic, you can buy the receiver from us that will pick up that drone signal of the drones in the area with a radius of several miles, and will give you the information about, is a drone there? Where is it flying? Is it still here? Is it flying towards me, away from me? And probably most importantly, show you where the pilot is so you can go and talk to them and say, hey, maybe you should land. This is not a good place to fly. Or if the person is either not cooperative or posing a threat, you could make an arrest. You could ask that the drone be landed. Or you can pursue investigation and enforcement after the fact. We've seen a remarkable number of stories of this making a difference airports, prisons, national security type VIP events, sports parades, marathons, you name it. I wish I could tell you the stories. Some of them are with our sensitive customers, but we know remote ID is going to make a difference because we've already done it, and it is solving problems. We certainly need a universal, industry-wide solution, but in the interim, we're not going to wait for that. We're going to try to solve the problem on our own. And most importantly, we're here to learn from you. So we're not done. We're not. This is not the bottom of the list of all the safety things that we do or need to do. We actually have an event coming up on May 22nd. If you're in the DC area, the morning of May 22nd, speak to me afterwards. Happy to invite you to an event we're doing where we will announce some additional safety initiatives that we're undertaking to help enhance safety even more. But we really want to know from you, what are your concerns? What more can we do? We think we've actually done a lot. We're not going to finish what we're doing either in terms of product functionality or safety. But it's really important. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel and engage with you today on these issues and find out from you what else we can do. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. All right. You got something on the computer? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. I'm Lawrence Williams from Zipline. Very excited to be here. When Chris reached out to invite me to come, I was very quick to accept. I think there's a tremendous amount that Zipline has in common with most of you in the room. First of all, we were founded to utilize the airspace first and foremost to save lives. We are a company that is focused on life-saving applications of unmanned aircraft systems. And like most of you, we work with healthcare systems and we make deliveries to hospitals. And like most of you, we are in the business of making money while keeping people safe, both in the air and on the ground. One of the things about Zipline as well that I think I want to make clear is that we're a very complementary service to air medical rotary aircraft. We deliver, we're in the business of moving products, not people. And as was mentioned in the introduction, we've been in business for the past 2 years and have made over 13,000 deliveries of emergency medical products. We started business in Rwanda, where we deliver approximately 1/3 of the national blood supply outside of the capital to hospitals. So for those of you, I imagine many of you all carry blood products on your aircraft. You probably know that they have relatively short shelf life. Actually, we have found from talking to different hospital systems that have their own aircraft that actually stocking blood products on helicopters is actually can be a challenge and sometimes involve traveling a couple of hours to pick up the blood products. So what Zipline enables is the ability to centralize that product in inventory, all with differing shelf lives. You know, there's 8 different types of red blood cells, plasma platelets, all with differing shelf lives, and deliver just-in-time emergency products on demand. We just expanded to Ghana in the last couple of weeks, where we're delivering not just blood products, but emergency medical supplies, all in the payload of approximately 5 pounds or less. One of the areas in which we are quite different is that we actually utilize fixed-wing aircraft that we design and manufacture on our own. And like Brendan, as he mentioned at DJI, that we have a real focus on safety. So I'm going to show just a very short video that give you a sense of how Zipline operates and some of the things that we do to make sure that we keep people, other users of the airspace, both safe and as well as people on the ground. How do we work on the audio here? With that? No worries. Oops.
Lives even in the hardest to reach places. Our planes crisscross the skies every day, delivering critical and life-saving. My name is Keenan Wyrebeck. I'm co-founder and head of product and engineering here at Zipline. We run the most advanced drone delivery service in the world. Zipline is dedicated to helping doctors save lives even in the hardest to reach places. Our planes crisscross the skies every day, delivering critical and life-saving medicine to people in need. With so many flights flying every day over both populated and unpopulated areas, we've put a lot of work into building safety features into everything we do. In our operations, for example, we use cutting-edge technology like computer vision in each pre-flight check to make sure that plane is ready to fly its life-saving mission. We are in direct contact with aviation authorities, enabling them to track every one of our flights. We use advanced algorithms and software testing to ensure that all our planes know where they are and where they need to go. To maintain the highest standard of safety, we've built redundant systems into our aircraft. The aircraft has 2 motors. If one stops working, it will keep flying on the other one. And the same is true for our plane's power, communication, and navigation systems. We've built backups for each, so if one stops working, the other kicks in and the plane keeps flying. Our aircraft are designed to fly 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in all kinds of weather and over all kinds of terrain. All the plane safety features work automatically on board the aircraft. From the ground, you won't even be able to tell they are working, all except one, and it's the system we are most proud of, the parachute landing system. We know that sometimes our planes might encounter challenges in flight where even our redundant systems are not enough. For example, aviation authorities may tell us to clear the skies in an emergency. Or unexpected extreme weather might require one of our planes to land right where it is. If such an event happens, that plane will deploy a large parachute, enabling it to gently land. The plane has another key safety feature, frangible design. The styrofoam shell of the plane and plastic parts like the tail are designed to break on contact, minimizing damage to anything on the ground. Here you can see that frangible design in action after parachute landings during operations. Those frangible parts are designed to be easily replaced, so that plane can quickly get back into service, saving lives. We believe in the work we are doing at Zipline, and we are committed to making and operating the safest system of its kind in the world. People's lives depend on Zipline, and that's a responsibility we take very seriously.
So we're very excited to work with all of you. We are, although only operating on the continent of Africa commercially today, we are headquartered in the United States, and we will be rolling out in new countries all the time, including in the United States before the end of the year. So would love to stay in touch. My email, very simply, lawrence@flyzipline.com. And I'll be around after the panel. Be happy to engage and answer any questions, and look forward to figuring out ways to integrate in the skies safely with each other and serve our customers, the hospital systems, working with you all. Thank you very much.
Brian?
I'm going to follow Brendan's lead here and,
There you
and
go.
speak from here. I'm a PowerPoint hater.
Oh, okay.
I'll just be real upfront about that. I like videos, though. Videos are cool. How's everybody doing? Okay, just checking. I run an association, too, and I want to thank Chris and Matt for the opportunity to speak today. And if I'm a little loose, it's because of the fact that we had a big event last week, and I was constantly up in front of folks. But this is an extremely important topic, and Matt knows he's only got to ask, and if I can do it, I'm here. AUVSI has been around since 1972. It's a very interesting organization. It started out, its foundations in the military. A lot of the initial drone work was being done for ISR work in Vietnam. And when Vietnam was wrapped up, the guys that had been doing that work stepped off base at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and wanted to make certain that it carried on. It wasn't that work wasn't lost. I only say that because sometimes people scratch their head and say, "Well, you guys must be pretty new." And the truth of the matter is, it's actually an organization that has been around for a long time. It was originally called something to do with remotely piloted aircraft. And today, I'll just, there's a much expanded scope of work. We operate in all the domains. So we're working on automated vehicles. If you're not just annoyed with drones, there'll soon be sidewalk robots that will annoy you as well, even worse than scooters, I suspect. And we have a very, very robust initiative now on the maritime side. So things, and there are large platforms as well as small things. They float and they swim. So some do both. It's a very diverse community. We have over 600 corporate members, or organizational members, I should say, and I don't know how many individual members off the top of my head, but anyone that works for any of our organizational members can participate in our activities. So last week, I think we had about 8,500 of my closest friends in Chicago. And the show floor had over 670 exhibits on it, including the new Bell Nexus, which if you haven't seen it, it is truly spectacular. Matt left out the most important credential that I have on this panel, and that's I'm a pilot. I've been a pilot for 25 years. As long as I've got breath, we're not going to do anything in this community that isn't really oriented toward the same levels of safety that manned aviation has developed over the years. And indeed, I think what drew me into this more than anything else was the fact that just if we look at small UAS, the scale that we've already got, what is it, 1.3 million, Joe? Aircraft have been registered. Not all of those are flying, of course, and not all of them fly at the same time. But we have the ability to test things out. We iterate these platforms faster. We can develop safety solutions and scale them probably quicker than we've ever been able to do in manned aviation before. And so I think what I'm dedicated to is that we're executing this technology in a way that ultimately will make the airspace safer for everyone. And I'm not sure we're there yet, but we're working toward that goal. The biggest challenge I think that we've got is public acceptance. I mean, there's a tremendous story to be told. Brendan indicated that the 230 people. That's just the count so far. Thanks to DJI, we now have a program that probably gets the most attention at our show, our humanitarian awards, and there's tremendous value being provided. And one of our humanitarian awards this year went to Zipline. I think you got one last year as well. So that's fundamentally how we are trying to get the word out on the value of the technology. The industry gets it. Industry is leveraging this technology very, very quickly, and I mean all kinds of different industries: mining, construction, insurance, oil and gas, utilities. Want to be able to take advantage of this technology, and I think that's really good. If we go back to some of the things that we were talking about, that Rich was talking about, trying to draw more people into aviation and have them have a better understanding of what's important when we have things flying. I think that's, we've now got industries flying that typically don't fly, and that's really valuable, and it allows for people that once had to hang from harnesses well above the earth to do their jobs, able to do those jobs more effectively and more safely. So, but the community that I'm most excited about is the public safety community. And I think next to the military, I think we're seeing the uptake of UAS in particular, but all kinds of different unmanned systems in the public safety community faster than anywhere else. My son's a first responder. He's was recently chosen, actually last week chosen to participate in a new program in his county down in South Carolina to utilize UAS, and he's very excited about that. He's been flying UAS for quite a while. But this is just, I asked him, well, who's doing the training? How are the ConOps being developed, et cetera, and it was just kind of this long pause on the other end of the phone. Everyone knows that it's valuable, but there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done. So I think that's the other theme that I wanted to just put out there that we have as a top priority, and that is our training programs. We have been partnering with the FAA, with Rich's group, AMA, and Matt's been very supportive of our Know Before You Fly campaign, which is literally, it's a broader campaign. Each of the manufacturers, such as DJI, what Brendan was talking about, are now doing this in a much more aggressive way. But for a while, people were walking out of electronic stores with a platform and just, launching it into the airspace, and next thing you know, it's in the wind and landing on the president's lawn. That was my first day meeting with the FAA administrator back in 2015. And frankly, everybody on the, is it the 10th floor, Joe? Everybody up there was really, the word came out that it was a drone that had landed on the president's lawn and on the White House lawn, and it was a government employee that had been flying it. And you could just see the head of every agency in the world going, oh, please God, please, not one of my people. And the person principal saying that prayer was the FAA administrator. It wasn't one of his people. But there have been a lot of different examples of this. So Know Before You Fly was kind of the first effort to try and get that word out, where it's safe to fly, and the fact that these are aircraft, that they're aircraft flying around in the airspace, and we don't like conflicts in the airspace, right? Everybody agree? So, so that was the first thing. The second thing that I wanted to highlight, putting our money where our mouth is we've gone ahead and launched our own training program training protocols, I should say, for commercial drone operators, and that is called the TOP program. I call it our top priority, but Trusted Operator program was a response to our community, particularly the trainers, saying, we're all teaching similar types of things, but we're not teaching it the same way. We should all get together and agree on what those things are. And so 180 odd folks got together. Joe and some of his colleagues participated in this effort to develop protocols using existing standards. We didn't make anything up. And AUVSI is not a training organization, but I think this is increasingly what folks in the utility want to know, because there is no other standard for it. If you're going to fly around my substation and do an inspection, tell me how you've been trained. I want to make sure you're not going to knock out my grid because you're stupid or you're not well trained. So, and up until that point, everybody, every trainer out there was the best trainer in the world, but nobody could test the veracity of the statement. So, so we've leaned in pretty hard on that, and I think that's getting good traction in the marketplace because of the dearth that was out there. I think we were asked to kind of look a little bit at the future state of the industry, and I'm going to point at the Nexus, not because it's super cool, it is, but because I think when I looked at that and I climbed in the cockpit of that particular device, I was scratching my head going, is this an electrified aircraft or is this a supersized drone? I'm not sure which. And the answer, of course, is yes, it's both. But it's going to do vertical takeoff and landing. It's not a completely electric vehicle. It's basically a hybrid. But the only thing running the propellers or the rotors are electric motors. So it's a very, very different animal, and I'm really glad I don't work at the FAA trying to figure out how to certify that for airworthiness. It's going to be a real challenge, because ultimately, and all of you would get this, if you sat in the cockpit, you wouldn't know what you were supposed to do other than push a button and say go. I mean, it's a beautiful display, but there's none of the typical accoutrement that we're used to as pilots. It's literally go, and then the thing is going to fly its mission. And I think that makes for some very, very interesting questions. The future of the industry, from my perspective, we'll know that we've achieved our objective when unmanned becomes a distinction without meaning. That vehicles can fly by themselves, or they can be piloted, or they can be pilot optional, or pick anywhere on that continuum. But there are instances where we might want an aircraft taken over, the control taken over from the ground. I know as pilots that kind of freaks us out. My wife's really in favor of that option, by the way. But I think I come back to and want to finish with public acceptance. The regulators aren't going to, we can't be expected to enable any sort of operations if the public is against it. Legislators won't be for it if the public is against it. The legislators control the purse strings and pay the regulators. Now, if we're out there and we're causing havoc in the airspace, that's a different matter. But I don't know anyone, well, there might be a few people out there that want to use drones for no good. But generally speaking, I think that's going to be such a small percentage of folks that once we have we've basically moved forward with things such as remote identification, which has already been mentioned, and tracking capabilities, and those things are codified and in law, and we have the ability to interdict drones, and we know that that is capable, we're capable of doing that if need be, but we have to do it safely, we have to do it in a way that doesn't interfere with other operations. Then I think this will become, like many technologies, somewhat transparent to the public, and yet another tool in your toolbox. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Brian, appreciate it. So just for a quick clarity, for those that don't know, let me give you a quick synopsis of where HAI stands on all of this. By the way, we beat your unscheduled landing. We had a mailman from Florida with a gyrocopter landed on the Capitol. Much better, yeah. But anyway, we had a crossroads a number of years ago, and we were looking at the whole drone issue coming up, and it was a clear decision. I mean, how do we treat this? Is this a threat to our industry, a congestion of the airspace, or is this something else? And we went down to something else, and the something else is it's a business opportunity, and the helicopter industry is probably the best prepared to operate drones in the purpose that they're going to be used. And the reason I say that is because we're the ones that are operating 500 feet or less. We're the ones that are operating in the vertical reference mode, taking advantage of hovering. We're the ones doing the missions that the drones want to do in terms of utility type missions, not passenger carrying. And so we went down that road. Overall, the membership is supportive of that, or recommendation, and that this is a business opportunity. Who better than us to be doing it? The option to that is you watch this happen and somebody else comes in and gets those missions. It allows a lot of things. It allows us to better control our operating environment 500 feet and less when we're down there. It allows us to keep constant relationships with our customer base, who obviously now is asking for unmanned aircraft services. And the answer on your behalf as operators needs to be, yes, we can do that for you. You don't want to be saying no. And so we took an internal step, a couple of them, quite frankly. We formed a new membership category in HAI, drone unmanned operator category. We also formed an UAS committee. We now have exhibitors on the floor at Heli Expo who are unmanned manufacturers and operators. We have demonstration cages. We have educational courses strictly for unmanned aircraft operations. Last week, we cut a partnership deal with Unmanned Safety Institute, who is one of the leaders in providing unmanned aircraft training programs. And HAI members will have the ability to hook up with them and get any of their courses, and you get a 15% discount on that course if you're an HAI member. In terms of the goals, pretty simplistic. Our main goal with unmanned aircraft is to ensure that there's the safe integration of the drone into the airspace. Good news is everybody sitting at this table shares that goal. We're all oriented. This has got to be safe as we have now or better when we enter them into the airspace. I think we've, as you heard this morning from some of the regulators, the intent here is a focus on integrating the airspace. You have to get the reference to this, that at a given point, conversations were occurring where certain people, stakeholders in different segments of the industry, they had the solution to the integration and how you keep us apart. And it wasn't acceptable to us because the solution was, okay, let's make this easy. Everything under 500 feet is restricted to nothing but unmanned aircraft. Nobody goes in there. And I mean, our visceral response was, we'll die first before we let that happen. So let's go to Plan B. And Plan B is we all have to share the airspace. This is nothing more than another category of aircraft entering the airspace. And we've integrated all kinds of things since we started. I mean, you started out with balloons, and we went through the whole iteration of gliders, powered flight, recip engines, jet engines, helicopters, paragliders, I mean, whatever's out there. And it's interesting, one of the recent aviation rulemaking committees that I sat on was the spaceport categorization arc. It's how do we integrate commercial space operations and categorize them into the airspace as a class of user. So this is like everything under the sun, the kitchen sink, is going to be in the airspace. And I think we've got a pretty good plans as to how it all works. So I'm very pleased with the fact that a lot of our members have now started unmanned operations within their companies, and they're taking jobs. And they're actually working with the customer base and switching out helicopters and putting in drones unmanned where it's appropriate. The other thing you have to remember is drones are not just what sits on this table and fits there. It's full production helicopters. And you might be familiar with the test they did out in Idaho about 2 years ago. KMAX was out there with an unmanned production helicopter, and they were fighting wildfires in the mountains day and night, and it went pretty good. So it's not going to be out of reason to think that within the next year, maybe two, you're going to see contracts coming out. They're going to be requesting services of full production helicopters to do utility missions without the pilot. It's going to be controlled from the ground. There won't be a pilot on the aircraft. So our world is changing, and you know what they say, if you don't change, you die. We intend to change and be one of the leading providers of safe, professional, unmanned vehicle operations. So just to give you an update where we're at and what's going on. With that, I'd love to get some mics out there and get some questions. So who wants the first question? Okay, we got one there, so can we get a mic there? Here we go, the mic's on its way. And if you can just identify yourself and your organization.
You said introduce yourself?
I'm sorry?
What did you just, I missed it.
Yes.
Introduce myself. I'm Michael
Yes,
Smith.
oh, I'm sorry.
I'm Michael Smith from Bell. Appreciated the comments about Nexus. Lou is not here. I was going to make that opportunity to say we're going to be putting in some exemptions. Question I have is for Joe. 21.17-XX is a draft advisory circular for certifying and not only airworthiness, but also certifying unmanned air systems. The draft that is public is May 2018. The draft that is internal to the FAA, when I've talked with them, FAA folks, they said, well, that draft is not current. So I'm having difficulty kind of interfacing, saying, well, we're working from, you know, the out-of-date version. And do you know when that new version might be out? Any information on that?
So I have to keep my answer fairly high level here. Number one, there will be more individuals from Aircraft Cert at the FAA symposium that's coming up at the beginning of June, which I think they'll be talking about their new view or how progress has gone on the safety continuum of looking at certificating aircraft that don't necessarily need to be held to traditional standards. But I will reference this. Draft advisory circulars, remember, an advisory circular is a demonstration of one means of compliance, not necessarily the only means of compliance. So the fact that you have a draft out there that you've seen and they're working an internal one, it's still not finalized. So the issue is, I don't have a date when that will be finalized. We have we have a lot of coordination that goes behind getting advisory circulars out now too, and guidance. We have guidance on guidance, actually. So, so the short answer is, hopefully we'll have this topic queued up at the symposium a little bit more, but the idea is regardless of whether it's in an advisory circular or not, we've used this in the UAM Urban Air Mobility Roundtable too, that bring us the entry point. Talk to us about how you intend to certificate the aircraft, and honestly, the details will hopefully be worked out in the process. And what we've been doing with UAS operations too is we don't have the answers to all of this right now because a lot of it is new. So enabling safe operations, the whole concept of that is if you need an exemption to something, if you want to become an air carrier, if you want to do something right now, we need to get those queued up so that we can queue up the specific safety discussion and not so much the procedure. So let's get away from what's the procedural thing that we have to do, because if we don't do it once or twice and get it out there, we're going to be constantly waiting for perfection on policy and guidance, when the reality, and you heard Jay Merkel say it today, if anybody listened to the hearing, we have tools in our tool bag right now that we can use. So waiting to certificate an aircraft based on an advisory circular, we don't necessarily need that advisory circular. What we need is the application, we need it going through the process, and that's what our job is too in the integration office, is to elevate these risk decisions so that they can be discussed.
Thank you, Joe. And then
Yeah.
one other thing, would you give me a little more information about this June symposium, FAA symposium?
Yes, so I think it's June 3rd through the 5th. It's here in Baltimore. This is the third or fourth annual symposium, that we've had. Once again, thank you for queuing that up. They're working behind the scenes to get all the right regulators there and all the right, many of these panelists have been there and will be there again. But not only is it a discussion in these types of forums, we have a resource center that's there. And the idea is that you can physically go to the different parts of the FAA, and we have representatives from all of them so that we can at least start the conversations. So we encourage all of you to go. We have it here in the local area in Baltimore, and I believe we'll all be there.
Yeah, I'd echo that from the industry perspective. If you really want engagement on UAS issues, particularly with the FAA, all the people are there, and it's hosted by AUVSI, so I'm sure Brian agrees
it's
that
an FAA event, but yes, we help.
managed, organized, and assisted. So highly recommend coming if you are interested in those issues.
Great.
Thank you.
Next question. Right here.
Sure, I'm Rick Kennan from Boston MedFlight. Fascinating discussion, really interesting for operators, certainly. If you could educate us a little bit about what you call universal remote ID and tracking. When operators hear that, we are already mandated for universal remote ID and tracking, and we call it ADS-B. So for situational awareness, what direction is the UAS industry going for remote ID, universal remote ID and tracking?
Just to start that off?
Sure, I'll start that off. So about almost 2 years ago, I and I think several of us were on an arc with the FAA to answer that question. How could we bring drones into a remote ID type of solution like ADS-B, but not necessarily ADS-B? We looked at both policy issues and technological solutions, one of which was ADS-B. The challenge with ADS-B out on a small UAS is there's too many of us, and we're going to distract pilots and saturate the frequency. So the FAA is disinclined, at least from my perspective, to say that is the right solution for small UAS. So
Actually precluded. We've been precluded of actually using ADS.
So currently precluded, and also not an ideal or even acceptable means of future remote ID mechanism for small UAS. So what else is out there? There's sort of two other ways to do it, generally speaking. There's some other kind of broadcast type mechanism, and there we're thinking along the lines of Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, the kinds of things that would allow you to use your phone to receive the ID signal, and because drones are kind of nearby, they're close to you, that's where the concerns arise. So if you could just identify them kind of like a license plate on a car, when they're nearby using your phone or a tablet or your laptop, there's your solution. Or a network solution where the drone is connected to, over cell phone to a back-end remote ID server, probably run by either one of the industry partners and or the FAA to be determined. But that requires you to connect the drone to the system, which not everyone is doing. In fact, most people aren't, along with a lot of fees and costs along the way. So from our perspective, DJI's perspective is we definitely want to get this ID solution done, but it needs to be simple, low cost, and easy to use, which is why we favor the broadcast method. Once it's there, like an ADS-B or other transponder, it's just sending out the license plate information along with position, heading, and everything else. The network side, I think, is going to be more complicated and expensive. I think FAA's in rulemaking and probably won't, at this moment, tell you where they're going with it, but from an industry point of view, we've been working on standards for all of those solutions. So the broadcast, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth type solution, and the network, the standards at ASTM for the network type solution, and then it'll be up to the regulator, not just here, but actually this discussion is happening in Europe as well and elsewhere. Hopefully a solution that will work. When we say universal, we want it to be universal. I don't want to have to put the solution into different drones in different places. We want one way to solve the problem. So hopefully that will standardize internationally, not just in the US, on the sort of the two main ways of achieving remote ID. But that's why we can't just use ADS-B, although I think apart from the spectrum and distraction issues, it's actually a pretty good solution.
If I can add on to that from a Zipline perspective, from Zipline's perspective, one of our concerns that I imagine you all share as well is uncooperating aircraft. And that uncooperating aircraft, when we go in to talk to the FAA about how we're going to see and avoid other aircraft, the hardest question to answer is, what are you going to do about uncooperating aircraft? So we're completely in favor of incorporation of some sort of see and avoid solution, transponder, and as I was just alluding to, in our waivers that we get from the FAA, we're precluded from putting ADS-B out on our vehicles to the point Brendan was making, because they're concerned about it overwhelming the system.
And I'll just finalize the comment that, so it is under active rulemaking. I'm a pilot, I'm not a lawyer, but I will say, so I can't go into details of that until it's released to the public for comment, which we're always looking for comments, especially from associations, because they're extremely valuable. But if you see the trend in all of our rulemaking, whether it be ops over people or anything else, lots of the preamble language talks about performance-based rules. And Part 107 is a performance-based rule too. It prescribes what you should do, but it doesn't tell you exactly how you should do it. You're not picking a particular technology. So the idea is if you look at how you fundamentally deconflict things in airspace in the manned world right now, aircraft have to be registered. So that's why we focused on registration. Aircraft have to call to get access into controlled airspace. That's why we had the Lance initiative, and we leveraged industry service suppliers to figure out a way to do that more expeditiously and safely. The next thing is you need to fundamentally identify things in the airspace. And how do you do that? That's why we're focused on identification. The next step is once you identify those things, there's probably a whole world of options for tracking at that point in time. So I think right now that is our UTM strategy, is to lay that groundwork so that you can fundamentally do the same things that you have in Class A airspace right now. Why can you have jets pass each other on the same GPS track going opposite directions very close to each other? Because they're registered, because they're known in the system, because they're tracked, and they don't necessarily, the controller isn't the last line of defense keeping those two aircraft 1,000 feet from each other. It's the whole system that has been put in place to do that. Now, can you have that to a lesser extent in lower altitudes and in some of the upper altitudes? I think the answer is yes. So our challenge is to write rules so that we're not prescribing a certain technology. And in fact, the UAS right now are using ADS-B in. So many manufacturers and many operations going on right now are seeing that you're out there, so that's helpful.
Yeah, one of the emails I got this morning indicated the draft is planned to come out in July.
That was the testimony this morning.
Yeah.
That was the testimony
So
of my
they
executive,
said.
yes.
From the FAA.
And that's
But-
my answer to it.
That's how I'm sticking to it, yes. But the other thing too is, it depends who you're asking as to what the tracking and ID should be. And what I mean by that, there was a pretty animated conversations between operational personnel that are looking at this for traffic separation, normal air traffic control functions, versus security. Security had a much deeper dive as to what they wanted in terms of tracking unmanned vehicles. And I felt it was much more overburdensome than a normal airplane. And I'm not sure why. I mean, it seemed that they were getting treated differently, where they wanted to know everything about this vehicle, where the operator was, and also the history of the vehicle. You know, where did it come from? What was its flight path? What was it doing? And where's it going? You know, type thing. And that was one of the main things we dealt with on the ARC. You know, so, I mean, I was the co-chair of that, and I'm anxious to see what comes out of this. So next
waiting.
question? Yeah, you got a mic there? Okay, whoops.
I'll have to get to her over there, I think.
I'm Michael Mock. I'm with Memorial Hermann Life Flight. We're another small part. We have our own certificate in Houston. Some of the challenges that I have dealt with as the safety officer with drones, I've interacted with enthusiasts on forums, social media, and they have these misconceptions that a helicopter is just going to blow the drone out of the way and it's not going to hit them. First of all, I've seen that one several times. They just think that as we're flying along, our rotor wash is always pushing everything out of our way. And then they say, well, birds don't have transponders, you know, and they're up there in the airspace. And I say, well, birds see me and try to get out of my way as much as I'm trying to get out of their way as well. But the idea of geofencing, I think I had heard about that before, but that, how would, if, other than around an airport or a national defense airspace, is there a way for us to get something like that around our medical center or something and have that put through your system? And what's the FAA think about that?
Oh, the geofencing. Yeah.
The geofencing.
Is that for me, I guess?
Well, you and for Jim as well, I think. And then it also kind of ties in with the disconnect. I kind of thought we were covered at our medical center from unmanned aircraft because we're inside of Class Bravo, but it's more than 5 miles from the airport, so drone operators can operate in that airspace with less restrictions than I can as a manned aircraft, because they're not required to call the tower if they have the certain exemptions and stuff.
Well, that's changing. So in the new legislation passed in October, the recreational community will also need to seek authorization in controlled airspace. So that you'll see those people in Lance as well, with the altitude limits that are in the designations. On the geofencing point, so first of all, do not believe or do not put too much weight on what you read on social media. Those are the most vocal people out there, and trust me, they find my email and they write to me complaining for those same reasons about geofencing, like why are you keeping us out of airports and we should make our own decisions. And look, we're not listening to that faction. We're trying to solve issues, and we do have a sort of a tiered approach to geofencing, because we can't, if we just block out every airport or every heliport with a 5-mile radius, we're shutting down a lot of beneficial operations, and we don't really know who the customers are. So we have a balanced approach. A lot of locations are warnings or enhanced warnings or authorization zones where our customers can unlock themselves with the geofencing, but they need to have verified accounts, sort of like your two-factor authentication on certain websites and apps. So we have a tiered approach to it, and I'm happy to speak with you either now or at some other point by phone about what we can do if we think we've missed something. We are actually quite concerned about helicopters. I think despite what the people on social media are saying, our perspective is there are a lot of reports of drones near airliners and at airports, but a lot of those are not accurate reports. What we have seen as accurate are 2 actual collisions between a helicopter and one of our drones.
Yeah.
So in terms of like reality, we are actually quite concerned about the low altitude helicopter traffic. That's part of what we're going to be announcing on May 22nd. So again, if you're in the area, please come to our breakfast event and you'll hear more about that. But we are looking for solutions. The problem or the challenge with helicopters is that you're flying everywhere, and we know that, at low altitude where the drones are. So we need to figure out a collaborative solution that's not geofencing, because every time you geofence, you're actually creating an impediment to the authorized operation as well. And we have a user management problem with a team that's 24 hours a day trying to unlock people who just show us a Lance authorization or something. We don't really know who they are. So definitely want to explore that some more, but would love to hear from the others on the panel about how we can enhance the safety in that environment.
Well, I'll mention, and then maybe Rich would want to cue on this, because we've received this question before about protecting helipads. But the reality is we realize that you're often going, especially in emergency situations, not just a helipad, you're going to other locations. Maybe it's a football field, maybe it's something else. So it's a bigger question than just restricting the airspace. So once again, it comes back down to somebody that goes to a store that buys something. How can you start reaching that person to know that, hey, if I'm around a hospital, there's probably a helipad. So that's where the Know Before You Fly is. That's where the app is. And I think in the last 5 years, it's gone a long way with AUVSI's help, with AMA's help, to when I go to a Costco and you buy a go-kart, you just know that you shouldn't be driving that on the highway. How do you somehow get the rest of the world to realize the same thing about drones? So the 180,000, or I might be wrong on the number of members with AMA, I don't think they're your issue, because they've got a culture of, and they've got safety standards. The 107 operators are not either. But we want to make safety so easy to understand that it reaches the rest of the people. So geofencing is one way to do it, but also the packaging, the education-wise. And the FAA can't do that alone. That's why I said we need to build this army of people that, and once again, you've got people out there conducting safe operations now, and they're all advocates, evangelists for, hey, there's a way to do this safely. So that's where we look to your industry also, because it's more of an education and a communication piece here, that you just can't take something out of a box and fly it, because trust me, we get all those sightings reports. We're the ones that are dealing with a lot of the questions. What's the FAA doing on this? So to us, it's enabling an environment where safe operations can happen, because our security partners have also said that there's basically the clueless, the careless, and the criminal. There's nothing you can normally do about the criminal besides put up security measures in place. The careless are the ones that we enforce, but the clueless are the biggest segment of people that we can probably, I'm not saying that your customers are clueless, but we want, your test that you put in there is a big step in the right direction. All these things. So I think AMA, you probably have led in the safety culture and simplifying it to, there's fields that you can fly at, there's mentors that you can go to, there's things like this. So maybe that's an opportunity for you to jump in, Rich.
Sure. I think what we're seeing in the recreational community, the big shift, is that these devices that DJI and other manufacturers make are able to do some things that the traditional model aircraft isn't really intended to do. For the most part, take pretty pictures. And because they can take pretty pictures, and the people are buying it more as an extended selfie stick as they are an aircraft, they're looking for things to take pictures of. And the interesting things to take pictures are in congested areas and areas where other operators are operating. And I think that is where the clueless comes in. They just don't think of themselves as flying an aircraft. Like I said, it's just another selfie stick. And they are just trying to take these pretty pictures, and they end up in places that they shouldn't. So that was what the Know Before You Fly campaign was intended to do, and why we do so much work through our communications firm to try and get the word out there to that clueless, and I'll be a little more kindly, that just the uneducated public, that they have to understand that these things are aircraft, that there are consequences when they're operated improperly, and that they need to know the rules when they're flying them. And that does become a little bit of a conflict, because the rules don't always fit their desire to take a pretty picture.
Well, the other thing too is it's the culture where we've got to get the people who buy these things to do recreational private work with them. And quite frankly, I've said this a million times, our concern is not with the commercial operators or the large, organizations that are in this. Rich represents a professional group that's been doing the model aircraft forever. You know, Brian's people, they have just as much risk as we do, and they're just as concerned as we are. They're going to do it the right way. But the thing is, you got to get out of this mental picture with the general public. That's a toy, and I'm a consumer. I'm not a pilot. And I'm going to charge this battery, and off I go. You know, and I'm now going to be the pilot of the year. We already have a system, and we advocate you don't need to reinvent the wheel. This is an aircraft. They're a pilot. If you own it, you're the owner-operator. And the rules have got to be pretty much the same. You've got to get a license to operate it. You got to register the thing, and you got to be required to go through basic training that you know what you're doing. And that's the major issue, to get to that point where you get the people who are buying these things to understand their obligation. The other question that keeps coming up is, we in the manned aircraft have this thing that always hangs over our head. It's called enforcement. And if we break a rule, we do something wrong, we're accountable for it. What are we doing with the UAVs? Every time I ask that,
Yep.
I get 9 different answers.
Well, the best answer is, as being a prior ASI, is we can only investigate and enforce to the extent that we have information. So if you can't identify the operator, we can't further the investigation. So that's why we've taken a reshuffle and a relook at our regulatory scheme of, we need remote identification, or we need procedures in place that we can identify whether the person should or should not be there. Right?
So if I could just ask you a question. So I agree, and we are proponents of enforcement. It came up in a lot of the DAC conversations a couple years ago. But I know at least one case, and it's the New York helicopter collision, where I know you know who flew that beyond visual line of sight in a TFR.
Yep.
I have not seen enforcement action, or if it's happening, it hasn't been talked about. So I do think there's at least there's a gap, or a perceived gap, that is impacting the perception, perhaps by some of the renegades on social media, that none of the rules matter because they aren't being enforced.
Yeah. And you got the unique thing.
Is something happening with that case?
So once again, I can't speak in this forum to whether that is, you know that as an attorney, but once again, the fundamental desire behind the compliance program is to assure compliance. Now, in certain individual cases, when somebody intentionally does something, that's reckless, and you clearly take enforcement action to the furthest extent of the law. When somebody is careless, or they're have no idea that there are even rules, how do you approach that? So is that one individual being made an example of going to solve the problem, or is there a bigger picture in place here that we need? So that's always and it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, the interesting part is, a lot of these operators that are going into the hobby shops or ordering online, you're talking about a 13-year-old kid. They charge the battery, they go out, they fly. God forbid there's a mid-air collision and it brings down an aircraft with people on it. Oh, who's going to the kid's house and you're 13 years old and come with us? Your drone hit an aircraft and killed 3 people. I mean, it's like, I don't even want to think about that scenario. Who's responsible for what?
The parents.
And I had one lawyer opine to me that, well, we'll go after the parents.
Yeah. I mean, look,
You know,
if
it's
the
like,
kid
what are you
takes the
kidding?
keys
I
to
mean,
the car
it's
and takes the car into the highway, you have the same scenario. I mean, that scenario is a parenting issue. And I do think we need to be realistic about where the threat and the risk is. The idea that it's just only consumers introducing risk into the system, it's just not true. I have a growing collection of examples from social media of Part 107 commercial operators doing dumb and irresponsible things they shouldn't because they're motivated by money. They have a client or a boss standing over them. They need to get it done. And that's why there's typically more regulation of a commercial operation than a recreational or general aviation operation. So I think we just need to be a little bit realistic here, that it's not, the consumers, particularly those using products that have built-in safety features, are not the ones causing the problems. They have no incentive to go out there and fly near an airport. We do need to educate them and have the safety features.
Sure.
But also need enforcement and a focus on the commercial side as well.
Well, and in the real world, you've also got the other issue of insurance. I mean, manned aircraft have got procedures and insurance and things and who's certified, but again, you get that think about that, you get that scenario where it's an underage operator and people get killed, there's no insurance or retort or, you know, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of loose ends here that have to be tied up, you know. Yeah.
Maybe I'll close this issue just so we can move on, but a point I'd like to make is it really comes back to education. And although there's a lot going on in education, there's not near enough going on in education. And if this really is the problem that bringing down a commercial airliner is imminent, which I'll be honest with you, I don't believe that's true. But if that is the situation we are at nowadays as a society, we should be taking a much closer look and doing much more to educate the general public. You know, I would point to what we did in the 70s to get people to put seatbelts on, what we did to put their kids in child safety seats, what we did to keep drunk drivers from being behind the wheels. That type of public information campaign needs to go out there if the problem is, as you mentioned, we're going to bring down a commercial airliner.
I don't know who's, did you ever get your question answered?
Yeah? Oh, we'll get a mic here.
Yeah.
As I understand it, the last Christmas they sold 750,000 drones during the Christmas season. We have a fleet, national fleet of, as I understand it, of about 200,000 aircraft, and it's foreseeable, if that's correct, that the fleet is going to increase to over 1 million, and that we're going to have, we have about 20% of the fleet in the air at any one time. So we're going to go from about 4,000 aircraft in the air to 200,000 aircraft in the air at any one time. And the great majority of those additional aircraft are going to be low level. Where helicopters operate. And is it conceivable, and should we be thinking about procedures where helicopters will be held up to allow a drone to pass? For example, I think of a HEMS flight on the way home from the hospital, going back to base from the hospital. It's not a critical portion of the mission, but a drone carrying an organ or blood. And will there be procedures in, is the technology at a point now where a drone can be given a right-of-way over another sort of what we call them, a standard aircraft? If you can pop in or pop up TFRs and block the drone out of TFR, I assume you can give it digital clearances. And I'm wondering if that's something we should be thinking about.
Maybe Lawrence's perspective would be a good start with this, because you're doing a lot of operations right now. So as far as giving priority to drones over other aircraft, I don't want to.
Yeah, the way we're doing it in Rwanda is we actually coordinate every flight with the air traffic control. That's something that's not really feasible in the United States, so obviously that's not what we're looking at doing. In the U.S., we're going to have to find a way to coordinate. We're going to end up operating just by the fact that we end up serving more rural and suburban hospitals, that we're going to end up operating a lot in G airspace. And so we're ultimately going to have a detect and avoid system. Initially, our flights, our routes themselves will be coordinated, and we'll have a safety case and be able to show that the risks. But our assumption is that we will be operating under the general way aircraft have always been regulated in the United States.
So
Will they put ADS-B in drones in Rwanda?
Well, as I mentioned, in the United States, we're precluded from doing that. In Rwanda, we have not been doing that to date. The air traffic control is coordinated every flight. The big issue that we run into, as I mentioned before, that I think there's a commonality is the uncooperating aircraft. In Rwanda, they don't have that problem. They're actually all aircraft is in controlled airspace there. So that's ultimately the biggest challenge that I think the industry is going to have to deal with is how do we see and avoid uncooperating aircraft or make all aircraft cooperating, which would seem like a better solution.
Mm-hmm. And I think the bigger discussion of that is if it requires rulemaking, we're talking it could be a 3 to 5 year process. But I think we have the foundation to find out these issues right now. Lawrence is working with one of the integration pilot program partners right now in North Carolina, where we're doing different delivery and different operations, especially in rural areas. But the idea is you have to flush out these scenarios. It's different in uncontrolled airspace than it is in controlled airspace, where you might be, Memphis Shelby, for example, that was talked about at the hearing today. They're conducting operations right on the airport. And it's very closely, tightly known exactly where that drone is, so it's not interfering with departures and arrivals. You could always have a flyaway or something, so there's a lot of procedures around that would go around the contingencies. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about delivering a rural area, as Lawrence had said, until you have that cooperative environment where things are identified, you're going to have to supplement with things like visual observers, things like technology that can detect other things, or a layered strategy that lays out, and we're using things like the the JARS SORA, the Specific Operational Risk Assessment. Talk to us about operating near power lines, for example, and I know that's where a lot of this audience operates. If you're coordinating with the helicopter operators that are trying to operate near those power lines, are other operators that close to the power lines when Xcel Energy, for example, needs to be inspecting that power line? So there starts to become some probabilities too. And what if they're operating next to the power line but not above it? So I think the answer isn't so clear. UTM is envisioned, an unmanned traffic management system is envisioned to be an environment where people know where other people are. Mm-hmm. So that's really what our goal is right now, because once again, if we try to solve a particular problem and it's 3 years out in rulemaking, that's not a situation we want to be in. We want to be setting up a performance-based environment so that industry can actually come forward with proposals that are safe and relevant, and we can use waivers, we can use exemptions, we can use things to get people into safe operations, whether they're an air carrier or whether they're just doing infrastructure inspection. So we wouldn't need all these people here and all these people up here if this was an easy problem. So. And it is exciting to be in this world because the world is kind of changing now, but we're all concerned with safety. So we appreciate the comments too.
Okay, there's a question over here. We've got a mic. We'll get it. It's right behind you. It's coming.
Thank you. My name is Danielle Fuller. I'm the Chief Pilot for Broward County Sheriff Fire Rescue. As an alternative to the ADSB, is there a technology where the drones will be able to receive the aircraft information around them and have the capabilities to avoid the aircraft within a certain proximity with the same kind of controls you'd have on the geofencing or the 400-foot, where they can't go beyond that, and then that way it's not a distraction to the pilots. They don't even have to know what's going on. Is that something that you guys are working on? Or direction that's possible?
Yeah, we do. Our company does have ADSB in the receiver side of that solution in some of our enterprise products, and I hope we can deploy it even more in the future. So that would give you traffic awareness. As a drone pilot, you would be aware of incoming traffic, including behind you, and you'll get alerted if our technology senses that a collision might be imminent because the flight paths seem to be converging. So we do have that. To do more than that would require a connection to radar or something else for us to bring in more information than we can already get out there in the world. On the awareness by the manned aircraft or helicopter pilot of the drones, again, then you have a distraction question, and also a technology. How do you get the drone's awareness, the awareness of the drone into the cockpit of your helicopter? I don't know, but that might be something for us to discuss. I think remote ID or UTM, which is the unmanned traffic management, sort of like the, not just remote ID, but also the management of traffic for drones, I think is probably part of a solution to that, but likely to be years away. In part because your community, your aircraft would need to somehow connect or participate in whatever that solution is if it doesn't already exist. We do know that ADSB exists, and we have deployed it in some of our products.
But I think in the meantime, and I'll go over to Brian, especially some things that have been displayed at Exponential. There's acoustic sensors that are out there right now. There's visual sensors. There's lots of different sensors that companies are coming up with. Brian probably knows better than most, but.
Well, I mean, inside of what time frame? The answer to the question is yes. And in what CONOPS? There's a, if you talk to Verizon, they want, they're building out 5G, and if desperate to figure out how do we amortize the billions of dollars that we're going to spend on that, and drones obviously represent a possibility. Kind of work that Zipline is doing is probably in very different kind of, you're not going to have 5G everywhere. Actually, article yesterday, I think 5G is going to be fairly limited. But in terms of the densest airspace, there are lots of CONOPS where things are connecting to one another in a lot of different ways. Some of that's air to air, some of that's air to ground. And a lot of these things are now just starting to get tested. IPP is one of the ways that's being tested. There was Ohio just got the ability to fly beyond visual line of sight using a ground-based detect and avoid system. I can't explain exactly how that works, but there's a lot of different approaches being taken here, and I want to say the simple answer to your question is yes. I just can't tell you when, and I can't tell you in what specific environment or mission it's going to be the case or what altitude level.
And then as far as the current ADSB in, is that passive to the pilot, or it still requires the drone operator to make the corrective actions to avoid the aircraft?
Our solution, again, it's just our company. We actually debated internally, should we create an automated response? And we did consult informally, I think, with some of your colleagues, Joe, about what, maybe it was Hoot, like, what do you think about this? Should we automatically have the drone move out of the way or descend? And our conclusion was, we don't really know what the pilot knows in that situation, and what if we're making the wrong decision? So we disfavor the automated response to that closing traffic. So instead, we are alerting with vibrations on the controller and audible sounds and a map showing where the traffic is coming from so that the drone pilot can make a smart decision. But certainly open for debate and discussion as to whether we should, at some moment in that scenario, actually do something in an automated way with the drone, like we do with geofencing, where you automatically prevent the drone from going somewhere.
But remember, Part 107 is the basis that says that the 107 pilot must yield and give way to the manned aircraft. So how you do that, it's, like I said, if you have ADSB in, that's their responsibility right now. It starts to become more complicated with beyond visual line of sight and how you assure that. But that's why we're wrapping this with a lot of other procedural safety items as far as becoming operators.
And the really good question over here, and we had an instance, I want to say it was 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, maybe, where an organ was delivered via beyond visual line of sight flight. So, does that now take precedence, and are low altitude helicopters being told get out of the way of that?
Okay.
And in what system are they able to know that drone's coming through and it's got some kind of an issue? So we don't know yet. But there's no question. These are good questions, and we're going to have to keep them right on the screen.
Okay, well.
An interesting aspect of the see and avoid with unmanned aircraft, and we've put this into the rules from all aircraft for years, is one element, and Lawrence alluded to it in his video, is in our rules, see and avoid includes actually disposing of your own aircraft if need be to protect the manned flight.
Sure. All right, well, I got to move you into the networking break, and
Thank you.
we went over. But be that as it may, it was a great session, a lot of good stuff, and a good interchange. And I really like to thank the panel. Great job.